Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Audible. In terms of storytelling structure, the Book of Boba Fett is a deeply, deeply strange show. I'll say right up front at the start of this video that I think there's some stuff to like here, from the creative and unique droid designs to some legitimately fun action set pieces. But I don't know if I've ever seen a show that shoots itself in the foot as eagerly or as often as the Book of Boba Fett. At every turn, this show made choices that left me baffled, confused, and often fairly bored. So even though there are some things to like here, and I'll try to highlight them as I go, overall, I'm going to focus on what made this show such a frustrating watch, and why, in the end, I think it just doesn't work. Oh, and be warned, this will feature spoilers for Boba Fett and The Mandalorian.
Let's go. I'm turning you over to Jabba the Hutt for the reward.
So from the start, the Book of Boba Fett was kind of in an odd position. It was both carrying the weight of fan expectations for a beloved character and working with a fairly clean slate. Obviously, this character has long been a fan favorite, mostly because his armor looks so cool and the sales of his original Kenner action figure were a surprise smash hit. Boba Fett himself is almost a non-entity in the original trilogy though. We don't know much about him, outside of being a cold, calculating bounty hunter who cares about getting paid first and foremost. Oh, and also that he dies really quickly and with very little fanfare in Return of the Jedi. The old expanded universe built him out beyond that. Suddenly, Boba was the ultimate badass. Comic books, novels, and choose-your-own-adventure stories saw him as the ultra-competent warrior, the Jack Reacher of space. Then the prequels came along and really complicated all of that, introducing a canon origin for the character that contradicted a lot of the EU work, a version of Boba Fett that was expanded on a bit in the Clone Wars cartoon. So a line seemed to be drawn between old fans and new, with many older fans who loved the EU hating the backstory that the prequels gave the character, and a lot of younger fans who embraced him wholeheartedly. So Book of Boba Fett was kind of in a weird spot with some big choices to make. Did they want to try to ignore the prequels as much as possible, or respect them and use his origin in Attack of the Clones as the basis for the show? Or maybe even meld all these different versions of the character together? Well, the answer was sort of none of those things. Yes, we do see a lot of references to his clone's origins. And yeah, we also see the EU scene of him making his way out of the Sarlacc pit and bursting through the sand. In terms of Boba Fett imagery, none of that was all that surprising. But in terms of characterization, I mean, what happened here? The Boba Fett of this show bears so little resemblance to almost any form of the character that's come before, but not in a way that feels thought out or clever. And look, I'm even willing to set aside the fact that the Boba that emerges from the pit is a barrel-chested 60-year-old man who doesn't really bear any resemblance to who we see in Return of the Jedi. If their take on the character was interesting, I really wouldn't care. But the character we meet here not only has a completely different personality than the Boba Fett of old, crucially, this take on the character, just taken on his own, is not really interesting, memorable, or fun to watch. If you wanted the badass anti-hero, you won't find him here, as Boba Fett has a newfound loyalty to the people of Tatooine. Sure, he does a little fighting here and there, but overall, this guy is the most squeaky clean, good-hearted crime lord you'll ever meet. And I did say crime lord, not bounty hunter, because he definitely isn't one of those anymore. Now, in their defense, you could say that the Boba of this show is a changed man for a reason. He spent time with the Tusken Raiders and they reshaped how he thinks of himself and others. That Tusken Firestick dance was like his own personal self-help book or something. Even then, I don't think it works. As an example, there's the scene early on where he's captured and held prisoner by the Tusken Raiders, and he attempts to make an escape. He asks his fellow prisoner if he wants to make the escape as well, and the guy just starts making noises, drawing attention to them both. And Boba Fett just gives up. This was the scene where I knew something was definitely off. We're talking about a character who is willing to deliver a man frozen in carbonite to Jabba the Hutt, and he doesn't care at all besides making sure he gets paid the full amount of what he's owed. This This is someone who found his father decapitated, who has lived as a bounty hunter on the Outer Rim, where life is cheap and people die constantly. That Boba Fett would choke this guy to death with no hesitation and try to make his escape, as we see him do later with that monster in the sand with those exact same chains. And that attempted escape scene happens before Boba really gets to know the Tusken Raiders at all, so even before that experience, he seems to have the moral compass of like Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is a problem if you're making a show about a bounty hunter who collaborates with the Empire. But the worst part is that this new, more moral Boba Fett, even after having a season of his own television show, seems far less fleshed out as a character than he did before this. The structure of the first 4 episodes is convoluted for no reason. Usually when you structure a season of TV non-linearly like this, it's because there's something the audience will get out of the flashbacks that connect with the present day in a really surprising or interesting way. Season 2 isn't really even my favorite season of Breaking Bad, but think about how that season had all those strange scenes of objects floating in the White's pool, and how, in the end, we discover how White's horrific actions with Jesse's girlfriend Jane indirectly caused it. It justified structuring the season that way. There was a real, concrete reason for it. I don't think there's any good reason for the first 4 episodes of Boba Fett to be structured the way they are. It feels like they're trying to hide Boba's true motive, when that's not really the case at all. There's no mystery to unravel here, and no reason to tell this story in such a disjointed way. The only reason I can come up with is that they were really afraid of Boba Fett mostly going without his iconic costume for the first few episodes. I've seen a lot of people online complain about the biker kids and their, skittled colored speeders. Honestly, at first, I didn't really have a problem with them. Their bike designs have kind of a 50s hot rod look going on, something that George Lucas has always loved. After all, his one big non-sci-fi movie is American Graffiti, set in the dying days of hot rod culture. And that kind of 50s Americana has cropped up in Star Wars before. Just look at Dexter Jettster's diner in Attack of the Clones. So I was willing to give these characters a shot, but there's just nothing to them. They're flat and uninteresting characters from the moment they show up, which is a much bigger problem than them having some goofy bike design. Now, there are some side characters I enjoyed here. Ming-Na Wen does the best she can with the generic material she's given, and manages to elevate it. 8D8, the Torture Droid, is a fun droid character that manages to not be a lazy copy of R2 or C-3PO. And I'm always going to be happy to see a Wookiee bounty hunter. There's even a lot of great actors in small roles, like Stephen Root and Danny Trejo, who give the show a nice shot in the arm when they're on screen. But none of these characters feel particularly fleshed out, and really, can you blame them? After all, they're the cast of a show with a super short 7-episode season with multiple episodes that are basically hijacked by an entirely different show. I guess that means it's time to really get into the Mando of it all. When the Mandalorian showed up in the first scene of episode 5, I really enjoyed it. I like that show, I like that character, and his first scene is exactly the kind of fun, tense action set piece that the series mostly failed to give Boba himself. A team-up episode felt like a fun idea. And then it kept going. And about halfway through the endless, never-ending exposition about this off-brand lightsaber, it hit me that, oh, this is just a Mandalorian episode. And the episode after that was also basically just a Mandalorian episode. In some ways, that was good. I like that show and these characters a lot more than the ones in Boba Fett. But I mean, that's kind of a huge issue, right? Just as the show was gaining some steam, and I do think episode 4 was easily the best of that first batch, it felt like the series lost interest in its own characters and shoehorned in a Marvel's Netflix Defenders out of nowhere. A team-up episode is one thing, but these were just full-on Mando stories, following up on the season 2 finale in huge ways, and I think that does a disservice to both shows. I'm not even really going to get into the Luke scenes here, because despite getting so much conversation online, I don't think they're actually very interesting. They're just the kind of Jedi training scenes we've seen so many times before. Yeah, the technology is interesting and a little creepy, but that would really deserve its own video. The real point is, all this stuff stops Boba Fett dead in its tracks, giving a show with already so few episodes even less time to figure out its own characters. And now, Mandalorian fans are just expected to watch Boba Fett, as it's basically mandatory viewing if you want to know what happens after season 2, which honestly I think is a straight up shitty thing to do on Disney's part. There's a season 7 episode of Star Trek The Next Generation that I really love called The Pegasus. In it, Commander Riker faces a tough moral dilemma. I won't go into all the details here, but basically, it's should he side with his old captain who is doing shady experiments, or should he finally admit to a secret that he's been kind of complicit in burying for years? Now, imagine if that episode ended without a resolution, and instead, the ending of that story was the entire focus of the 6th episode of Deep Space Nine. That just wouldn't have been accepted because these are two very separate shows that needed to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. Crossovers are one thing, but it would be ridiculous to rob TNG fans of a satisfying ending to a storyline on their show by shoving it into a spinoff. I think that's exactly what Star Wars did here. There are so many Mandalorian viewers out there that are just very casual Star Wars fans, and probably have no idea that they have to sit through 4 mostly mediocre episodes of TV to get a real resolution to the season 2 finale. Meanwhile, the people who just want a good Boba Fett show aren't getting that either. By making this show season 2.5 of Mando, you've done a disservice to both shows. And while there's plenty of references to the cartoons that probably made hardcore Star Wars fans really happy, almost none of them are in service of Boba Fett's story. And that's a problem. I mean, the final scene of this show was Mando and Grogu having a cute little conversation and flying off together. Then, the post-credits scene was focused on the revival of a character TV audiences also know from The Mandalorian. The entire cast of Boba Fett was relegated to an afterthought in their own finale. When it all wrapped up, I think it's fair to say that this wasn't a Boba Fett show. This was a mushy IP fanservice stew. That may make a lot of fans happy, which is totally fine, but for me, the title The Book of Boba Fett felt like a lie because this was barely his story. In the end, maybe it's best to just leave Boba Fett as a mysterious figure in a great costume, especially if this was the alternative that they wanted to give us. You know, not all the Star Wars Expanded Universe stuff is great. Both the old novels and the new have their flaws, but if there's one guy I trust to consistently deliver a great character-driven Star Wars story, it's Timothy Zahn. So why not check out his audiobook Heir to the Empire free on Audible? Or maybe go with something a bit more recent and download Thrawn. It's really hard to go wrong with either one. Thrawn is an amazing character who is definitely making his way into the Disney Plus shows more and more. So if you want a true tale of Star Wars villainy, they're definitely worth checking out. Of course, that's just the start of what Audible has to offer, as their catalog gets bigger and bigger. So there's always something new to check out, whether you're into biographies, fiction, self-help, and way more. Their Plus catalog goes far beyond audiobooks, and features great audio content in all sorts of formats. Not only is it a good deal, I can easily download them and listen to them whether my phone is online or not. I've been an Audible member for years now, and I really look forward to spending my free credit every month. And you definitely can too by going to audible.com/midnight or texting midnight to 500-500. That's audible.com/midnight or text midnight to 500-500.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.